Well, good morning, everyone. Well, good to be here, good to be with you. There are a few people here I have not yet met. So my name is Lisi Schröttner, and I am the still new co-pastor here at Wildwood. And for those joining on the live stream as well, welcome to you. Well, as we've heard a few times already, it is the first Sunday of Advent. So welcome. During these 4 weeks before Christmas, we recognize and celebrate God's work in the world across time. Let's put my slide up. All right, the slide will come up in a second here. So we're celebrating God's work in the world, past, present, and future. We celebrate this eternal unfolding or unfurling of God's kingdom here. It's a significant season as it begins the church calendar for many Christian traditions. It's an extraordinary season in that it leads us through some different, unusual practices and stands out from the rest of the calendar. This year's theme at Wildwood is Together on the Journey, and we invite you throughout the service of the next few weeks to recognize how this theme plays out in our worship and how it shapes the space we are in this morning. You notice we started with a section called Waiting for the Light. So we started in darkness, and spoiler alert, we're going to end in darkness as well. So this journey motif is even woven throughout the service here this morning, and we'll be doing that each Sunday. I invite you to also look at the decorations at the front and sort of see if you can notice the journey motifs spread throughout those as well. I just want to say a quick thank you to the Advent Committee who spent time visioning and dreaming together and putting this season together, and for the decorating committee that was here yesterday. A big thank you to all of those who helped put this up here in the sanctuary, who put the black plastic there on the back to make this a darker, sacred space for our Sunday mornings, as well as the decorations out in the lobby. We are on this journey together, and our hope is that we will all experience the presence of God in meaningful ways as we move toward Christmas together. So I imagine some of you have some fond memories of Advent, which for some is synonymous with the growing excitement as we get closer and closer to Christmas. Maybe you started your Advent celebration on November 1st when the first strings of Christmas lights were plugged in, and the first carols greeted your ears as you entered the coffee shop. Doing Advent together at church is just an added bonus, an excuse to belt out familiar Christmas hymns together or get excited about the holidays together. You might have some fond memories of the Advent candles being lit at church, or maybe that's just me. I get excited about that part. All right. I had a picture of me from my childhood. I don't know. There you go. That's going up anyway. Thanks, Sean. Just thought I'd throw that up there. Christmas has always been a special time. I won't tell you which one of those children is me. But again, you might have some fond memories of the Advent candles being lit at church, that point in the service that briefly focuses our attention on this season, where there's this collective holding of breath, this waiting, is the candle gonna light this time? I know some of you have anxiety about lighting candles in church, and I'm sorry, but I wish I could take away those fears. It's really not too bad, but that's okay. That's you. We'll try to make this a comfortable experience for everyone. So on that note, maybe some of you do not have positive memories of Advent. Perhaps for some of you, it's a bit of a difficult season. This waiting element of Advent resonates with you most. Waiting for God to act, waiting for God to save, waiting for the promise and hope of Christmas, and you cry out more than once, God, how long? Maybe this is what Advent brings up for you. It reminds you of all that you are or ever have been waiting for in your life. Promises, filled or unfilled. News, both good and bad. Or this is just a challenging season for you in general. Holidays and family gatherings where you can't run from hard conversations or complicated family dynamics. With its cold days and long nights, this season can feel like a long sojourn in the vast, snowy landscape where all shapes and light blend together, and you can only move forward one step at a time, unsure where your next step will land. If this is your experience of Advent, you are not alone. If this is what you're anticipating for this season ahead, you are not alone. And I just want to mention briefly, on December 20th, the longest night of the year, we are having a service here at Wildwood at 8 p.m. called the Longest Night Gathering. And we'll be spending some time with word and song and silence. And this is a space for you to sit with all those things you're feeling, the good and the bad, the hope, the loss, the grief, anything you are carrying, you're invited to that. So that's a Friday night, I believe, the 20th at 8 p.m. here. You've also noticed that we have put up the candles that are here for Eternity Sunday, because most of you were not here at the sanctuary, and the candles were lit in honor of those that you are remembering. But if you want to light a candle for yourself, this will be up for all of Advent, and feel free to, whenever, just go up and light a candle, remembering something or someone that you have lost. So this morning, we are ushering in this season together, and I want to offer you a word of hope. Again, Advent is this extraordinary season, the beginning of the church calendar, a time to celebrate and also a time to feel all the hard feelings. So while it is extraordinary, it is also a time to recognize the ordinary, the absolute ordinariness of our lives, how God enters our stories and what can feel like our mundane lives. And God invites us into the work of renewal in the world. I believe Advent offers us this moment to examine this entering of God into our story as individuals and as a collective. And it's a moment to reimagine our ordinary, common, messy life as the site of divine unfolding. So I discovered this new website of liturgical resources this week, and one of the founders and theologians, Reverend Anna Bladel, described one aspect of their work with this line, and I just loved it, and it really stuck out to me. They have a passion for reimagining our ordinary, common, messy life as the site of divine unfolding. And that's one of the threads of this morning's sermon. And it brings us to our story today. At the turning from the old year to the new, at the intersection of ordinary and extraordinary, we're invited to listen to the song of one who offered her very body as the site of divine unfolding. Mary, the mother of Jesus, an ordinary person, yet one with an extraordinary role. Mary represents so much, and notably here she represents a people under occupation. And her words embody the great reversals that are part of God's kingdom, a disruption of the status quo. The beautiful thing about this passage is that this song embodies hope for both, again, the individual and the collective. Hope for the small and lowly, for the one who feels forgotten and downtrodden. And it represents hope for communities, all the poor and powerless among us. The other beautiful thing about this passage is that it offers us a song to sing as we proclaim this audacious hope during the season of Advent. In our own cultural moment, miles and time and years separated from first century Palestine. But now we are living in a time when we're sold this promise of peace, our own peace of Rome or Pax Romana, which I'll talk about later. Wars continue to rage, though. Individuals and groups continue to dehumanize and kill the other, and people are still under occupation. So how do we remain a people of hope? How do we hold on? This is the invitation for us today to reflect on as we journey together through this season and as we begin this new year together. How can we, again, reimagine our ordinary, common, messy life as a site of divine unfolding? So let's go back through the text and reflect on what this means for us on the journey. So who is this who sings of God's salvation and compassion? Well, this is Mary, the mother of Jesus, who calls herself a servant of God, bowed down before all in lowliness. And this is a painting by Da Vinci, and it's actually Mary and her mother, traditionally known as Anna, and the baby Jesus. And it's a beautifully intimate painting of the Holy Family. Now, I grew up in the evangelical church, and Mary was certainly an important figure, and especially at this time of year, but we didn't revere her as much as in other traditions. But usually year after year at Christmas time, her trust in God's ways were always noted and celebrated. Mary's encounter with the messenger Gabriel, which we sang about a few minutes ago, a little ways into Luke chapter 1, shows Mary's willingness to trust and say yes to God. She is a model of obedience and faith. Mary calls herself and her position in this world lowly, and this word comes up a few times in our text. It's a word that historically actually has quite a derogatory tone, describing someone who is literally close to the ground, bowed down in humiliation, trying to get out of the way for someone more important. With this in mind, it's easy to see Mary as a submissive and passive one, willing to carry the Christ, the God with us, into this world, giving herself over to more humiliation and derision as an engaged and pregnant woman. But as I got older, my view of Mary expanded, and the narrative that I heard around her changed. I was learning more about the context in which Mary was born, the ancient Palestinian culture in the first century of the Common Era. I started following more scholarship on this context, and which has every year yielded more and more fascinating insights into this world. And growing up, I had never really paid attention to this part of the text, this part of the birth narrative in Luke's gospel, which we are calling the Magnificat today. If that's a new word, that is just the Latin for magnifies, as in my soul magnifies the Lord. But this passage has really become one of my favorite parts of the gospel accounts. Most scholars believe that this gospel, according to Luke, comes from the end of the first century, so after Jesus died and rose again. People call this part, this Magnificat, a post-resurrection hymn. And we're not sure if Mary really actually spoke these words of God's saving action, God lifting up the lowly, filling the hungry, doing great things with compassion. But whether it was Mary or not, there's something really important about the intention or the meaning behind the words. Whether or not the historicity matters for our faith, there's something profound about these specific words coming from Mary. You see, the Magnificat embodies the main themes of Luke's gospel, which he will develop later throughout the rest of the book. And these themes include salvation, God working throughout human history, and importantly, the poor and the lonely. I keep saying lonely also works. The poor and the lowly getting the best seat at the table. These are some of Luke's main themes throughout the book. So here at the beginning of Luke's gospel, a few verses in, the writer lays out his theology and his main message, and who gets to say these things. Luke puts them on the lips of Mary, a young woman who says yes to God and the salvation that God will bring. And along with that yes to God, Mary says no to the oppression that is facing her and her people. And I love the way that chaplain and minister Kelsey Waters writes this. So Mary takes on the divine no to all the conditions of oppression as her own. She stands in solidarity with divine outrage over the degradation of divine life and with the promise to repair the world. Therefore, Mary becomes a companion in hope. A companion in hope. Through the lens of the Magnificat, others have called Mary things like joyful, passionate, and unruly source of hope, inspiration, and strength. I love all of these words used to describe Mary. So Mary is a beautiful model of faith and trust for us, and above all, hope. Mary models what audacious hope looks like in the context of oppression and waiting for God. So Mary's song, powerful as it is, does not stand alone. She follows in the footsteps of other great women from Jewish history, and she joins her ancestors in singing of God's salvation. A very important parallel is Hannah's song, which can be found in 1 Samuel chapter 2. And I invite you to go and read that for yourself. Hannah is the mother of the great prophet and priest Samuel. Hannah herself is a woman of lowly status, unable to conceive children, and enduring constant scorn from her husband's other wife. God hears her cries day in and day out in the temple, and God answers her with a gift, a son whose life will be devoted to service in God's temple. So Hannah's song is very similar to Mary's song, And in fact, the Magnificat could very well be modeled after the song in 1 Samuel. Now, Hannah does include a little bit more vindictive language, as do the other salvation or victory hymns found in places like the Psalms. Mary rather focuses a little less on the gloating part of it and more on what God has done. And that brings me to the second aspect or shape of the Magnificat today. The first was the individual. We looked at Mary. And the second is the collective, the people of God. This song isn't just about Mary's personal experience of God's salvation in her life. This is a song of hope for the community. And Mary is pregnant with the hope for the world, especially for her people and those who are considered lowly. As I mentioned with Hannah, this song belongs to the tradition of salvation hymns of her people. I also want to point out that the Magnificat is one of 4 songs or canticles in Luke's narrative of Jesus' birth. The priest Zechariah praises God after the birth of his son, John the Baptist, who will point to the coming Messiah, Jesus. Then we have the angels singing praise when Jesus is born in the skies over the fields. And then we have an old guy named Simeon who praises God in the temple shortly after Jesus' birth, and that's the picture up there. These 4 hymns punctuate the first 2 chapters of Luke, and, like the Magnificat, they embody the message of the whole gospel that's to follow. Whether it's one short verse, like we see in the Christmas narrative, or as many as 12 verses, which is Zechariah's song. Again, this message of salvation, God working in human history, and the poor and the lowly getting the best seat at the table. So the word for lowly that described Mary a moment ago also describes the group that Mary is part of, Jews living in Palestine under Roman rule. A people who, with the exception of the elite minority, were just trying to survive, bowing under the weight of local rulers. All while the kings way off sit in Rome, pontificate about the so-called Pax Romana, or the Peace of Rome, which was this 200-year period of history. But peace for whom? Who was actually flourishing in this time? That's why this song and the other ones in Luke are so powerful. God's people have been waiting for God to act, waiting for redemption. In the last few centuries, they were consistently under foreign rule, a never-ending cycle of occupation, with a brief period of self-rule that did not last very long. And now they were under the Romans. The present situation was not good, and signs of hope were few. But here was the good news. A Messiah was coming, a plan conceived in ordinary and albeit scandalous circumstances. So for the early Jesus movement that recorded what they saw and believed, God was indeed lifting up the lonely and fulfilling ancient promises. This song, the Magnificat, in Greek, in its lyrical structure and the rhyming scheme, really packs a punch. Or to use less violent language, this song is pregnant with hope, and it's really a beautiful piece of writing. And it is a song of hope for the community, a community of most ordinary folks under oppressive rule who have received a light, a signpost of the kingdom of God, a beloved community where the lowly are lifted up, the hungry are filled, and injustice and wrongs are righted. Social reversal. It's an upside-down kingdom, and this is the kingdom that Jesus preached. If we look at the larger context of the Gospels, Jesus' message of a new community was good news to the lowly, those who had otherwise been overlooked. Those on the outside looking in were now invited inside. And what's more, the community was no longer just one people group, but it was open to all. The community was no longer for the privileged few, but now for those who'd been shunned or pushed to the back of the line. God's love and mercy were for everyone, and apparently this was a subversive message. Jesus' beloved community was changing the world from the inside out, and it ended up looking a little less like the anticipated military triumph over Rome, and more like a nonviolent protest for the liberation of all. Liberation from the chains of spiritual and physical oppression. This was, again, subversive. Disturbed the peace. It was extraordinary and revolutionary. So later, the religious leaders couldn't accept it. The empire couldn't risk it. So Jesus eventually had to go. And that's a story for Easter. But Jesus didn't leave without leaving a legacy of peace and without leaving a people to rise up and work for the good news of God's kingdom. So what does this mean for us? Where is the kingdom of God? Well, we are a post-resurrection people, and the hope of Jesus is carried by those who believe and those who wish to see the world made right. We are called to have hope. Near the end of the book of Romans, in chapter 15, verse 13, Paul prays, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace." And I lost my spot, sorry. "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." This is not an always smiling sort of optimism that ignores the pain and suffering of the world or ignoring our own pain, but a gritty, grounded hope. This gritty, grounded hope, and this is from Leah Reesor-Keller's book, which I got at the MCC Peace Conference. It's a beautiful resource, and she talks about hope, and she spoke about hope at the conference as well. And she named it as gritty and grounded hope, getting into the dirt kind of hope. This is a kind of hope that knows another world is possible, that things are not right, that the world that God created and breathed into can be returned to its original goodness. The world that is all the site of divine unfolding. And like Mary, then, can we become companions in hope with God and also with one another? Can we say yes to God and say yes to one another in birthing hope and a new world? Saying yes to one another is one way to describe solidarity, which is a word you might have heard a few times. It means we acknowledge our interdependence as human beings and as members of the created world. It means that I recognize what is important for you, and I will support you. Now, in the last year, I've had more than one difficult conversation about what solidarity actually means. Does it mean I have to support causes that I don't agree with simply for the fact that the other person truly believes it is right? And this has been really tough. There's a sign from a protest I was at a few months ago that gives you an idea of what my thoughts are on things. But it's tough to have these conversations. It requires discernment and a heck of a lot of grace for the other. In our polarized world, sometimes it's hard to be in solidarity. It's hard to see our common humanity, to get to the core, to the common values that we all share, and to see one another through the compassionate eyes of Jesus. So I wish you all grace as you have those hard conversations, especially as Christmas rolls around. And really, I truly pray grace and peace to you as you have those conversations. But I believe solidarity is what we're called to, and it's one of the markers of the way of Jesus. On the journey of becoming more like Jesus, we make space for one another. And in so doing, we make space for God to work. Solidarity is the work of the church as individuals and as a collective. We work towards the flourishing and liberation of all. So I came across a meme this week from a show I just actually watched and completed in this past year. It's Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Has anyone watched that one? I got a few hands. Great. Yeah, I was fairly new to that, and it was a really great show. But I came across this meme this week. So Mary, watching churches everywhere quote the Magnificat, "Why is no one casting down the mighty? I specifically requested it." This is Captain Holt in his sort of deadpan kind of way. So as I was reading this and rereading this, I thought to myself, but it wasn't Mary that requested it, it was God. And I'm overanalyzing a meme. I know that's not something maybe a lot of people do. Maybe more people do it than I think. But as I was looking at this over and over and sort of chuckling to myself about it, I started to recognize a different meaning behind the joke. And that's God speaking through Mary, or God speaking through the author of Luke's gospel, saying, "This is what my kingdom is about. This is what I am about. Now go and do likewise. As ones who bear my image and bear my heart, go and do likewise." And this phrase we heard repeated over the fall that Jesus says in Luke 10:37, "Go and do likewise." So like Mary, can we sing this story with our lives and proclaim, "My soul cries out with a joyful shout that the God of my heart is great. Can we reimagine our ordinary, common, messy life as a site of divine unfolding? This Advent season, we're invited on this journey together in solidarity with one another and with our world. We're invited to hold on to hope and bear this good news to those around us. For the hurting among us and the downtrodden around us, can we sing a song of hope and wrap them in that hope as we meet their needs? May we let God work in our ordinary lives and do something extraordinary. It doesn't have to be big, like birthing the Messiah, but it can be different, unusual, and remarkable in its own way, and that's what extraordinary means. So this is my prayer for all of us as we work toward the collective liberation of God's good world. And I'd like to end with a scripture remix, as they called it, from that website I spoke about called Enfleshed. And this is the Magnificat re-envisioned for our time today. So I'd like to end with this. My soul is alive with thoughts of God. What a wonder. Their liberating works. Though the world has been harsh to me, God has shown me kindness, seen my worth, and called me to courage. Surely those who come after me will call me blessed. Even when my heart weighs heavy with grief, still, so does hope abide with me. Holy is the one who makes it so. From generation to generation, love's mercy is freely handed out. None are beyond the borders of God's transforming compassion. The power of God is revealed among those who labor for justice. They humble the arrogant. They turn unjust thrones into dust. Their wisdom is revealed in the lives and truths of those on the margins. God is a feast for the hungry. God is the great redistributor of wealth and resources. God is the ceasing of excessive and destructive production, that all the earth might rest. Through exiles and enslavement, famine and wars, white supremacy and climate crises, God is a companion in loss, a deliverer from evil, a lover whose touch restores. This is the promise they made to my ancestors, to me, to all the creatures and creations now and yet coming. And in this promise, I find my strength. Come, great healer, and be birthed among us. May it be so.